Well, hello everyone, how's it going? I am Lukash, and this is my channel, A Cruel Reader's Thesis. In case anyone has forgotten, I have not made a video in probably about a year for this channel, but I thought that I would try to make one video for the event ShakeTember. So ShakeTember is a booktube event celebrating the works of William Shakespeare in the month of September. This event is hosted by Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, and Nicole from A Day of Small Things. Back in the day, I was myself one of the hosts of ShakeTember. I also co-created it back in the day, but then I kind of stepped away from booktube as per not posting any videos for over a year. And so I kind of stepped down as a host of this event, and Jason, Nicole, and Kelly are doing a great job. I will leave links to their announcement videos and to some of the videos that they've made for the event itself so far this month for you to watch should you be so inclined. They've been great, the videos so far. I thought that for ShakeTember this year, I would actually try to participate. As a former host and co-creator of the event, I kind of felt bad last year not reading anything for ShakeTember, and the year before that, I also kind of didn't end up reading anything for ShakeTember, and that was even worse because I was actually supposed to be a host still that year. But this year, I decided for ShakeTember to reread Shakespeare's play Titus Andronicus. And I reread it because it's one of the plays that is being covered by the hosts. Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse reread the play and made a really interesting video on it, which is one of the videos I will link to in this video. And I just decided to take that opportunity to revisit the play Titus Andronicus myself, because I read Titus Andronicus several years ago now for the first time, and I read it at a time when I was reading a lot of Shakespeare. There was a period in my life where I was reading like a few Shakespeare plays a month, or maybe even one a week. I just remember a period in my life of a few months where it was like day in and day out just reading Shakespeare play after Shakespeare play after Shakespeare play. It's probably a little bit too much, to be quite honest, but I read Titus Andronicus amidst that frenzy of reading through a ton of Shakespeare, to a point where I almost read all of Shakespeare's plays in that go. I didn't quite get all of them, but eventually I did read all of them. I have read all of Shakespeare's plays. And when I read Titus Andronicus in that big frenzy, I hated it. I really, really hated it. I just thought it was awful. And if you asked me off the cuff what is my least favorite Shakespeare play, answer was always easy. It was Titus Andronicus, because I read it and I just thought it was extremely dumb. And I thought it would be interesting to revisit because, for one thing, I know Jason has a very deep appreciation for the play and really loves the play, as evidenced by his video. He also made another video a few years ago about Titus Andronicus. That was also really good. I thought I would reread it in conjunction with him covering it to kind of see his thoughts and stuff. And just because I wondered whether maybe my having read Titus Andronicus amid reading all this other Shakespeare maybe kind of colored my experience of it. You know, I mean, even people who like Titus Andronicus, I suspect, would be willing to admit that, you know, it's not quite as good as, like, Twelfth Night, or Macbeth, or many of his other more famous and more widely read plays. And so perhaps reading this play alongside a lot of those other plays just kind of brought it down, and maybe if I looked at it with fresh eyes by itself, maybe I would develop more of an appreciation for it. So anyway, this has been like 5 minutes of throat clearing before I actually get to talking about what I'm talking about in this video. But to begin to really talk about Titus Andronicus itself, I will just say in brief at the beginning, so that there's no suspense about it, that I did not hate it with the vehemence that I hated it the first time that I read it, but I still don't really like it very much, but I also don't take it very seriously, so my dislike of it is not very vehement, right? I kind of am like, alright, well, this is easy to read, it's got a relatively fast-paced plot as long as you don't think too hard about a lot of the plot points, and I guess you can argue that maybe it explores some of the darker sides of the human impulse to employ horrific violence to get revenge, right? And the way that sort of cycles of revenge and retaliation work, right? But that idea was nothing special in Shakespeare's day. There were a lot of revenge tragedies being written in Shakespeare's time and before Shakespeare's times. They were very popular. There was the Spanish tragedy of Thomas Kyd. That was probably one of the more popular ones. So anyway, I still don't like Titus Andronicus, but I also don't take it seriously enough to exactly hate it, right? So anyway, to get into the play proper, so just to give a little bit of an introduction to the plot. So Titus Andronicus takes place in ancient Rome. I don't think it's very well specified what particular period in Rome it takes place, although it's clear that it's after the fall of the Roman Republic and during the imperial times, because there is an emperor in Rome that's referred to a lot, and who is emperor is a big part of the plot. But so at the beginning of the play, Titus Andronicus is this general, this great Roman general, who has just spent many years off fighting the Goths. And it's also not clear why he was fighting the Goths, if he was just conquering them, or if they had made some sort of an incursion into Roman territory or whatever. It's not that important, but he had been off for years fighting the Goths, and returns in triumph to Rome with prisoners in tow. So he brings home with him from his victorious campaign against the Goths, Tamara, the queen of the Goths, and he brings 3 of her sons, and a man who is her lover, a guy named Aaron, referred to as Aaron the Moor, which basically just means he's black. So Titus makes this big deal out of the fact that 21 out of 25 of his sons were killed fighting the Goths, right? So he comes home with 4 sons left out of 25, and his one daughter, Lavinia. And he decides at the beginning of the play that, as revenge for the deaths of his 21 sons, that he will execute Tamara's son, Alarbus. And he does so against her pleads that he not. He executes Alarbus, and the remainder of the play is kind of a back and forth between Titus's faction on the one hand and Tamara's faction on the other, right? So Tamara wants revenge for Titus having executed her son. What the retaliation that takes place for that then triggers another retaliation on Titus's part, which then sort of goes back and forth. So that is kind of an introduction to the plot, or at least to the inciting incident of the plot. I'm not going to go over an entire plot summary, but I will say that I'm definitely going to be spoiling things in this play in my discussion. So just keep that in mind if you're watching this and you don't want spoilers. I don't know why you would watch this if you haven't read the play, but if you are and you don't want spoilers, just be forewarned. So, we've gotten the plot introduction out of the way. Now to my own kind of commentary on this play. So, to start with my problems with this play, my first big problem is that the plot makes no sense. I did mention briefly earlier that the plot is kind of fast-paced and enjoyable if you don't think too hard about it. But the problem is if you do start thinking about the plot, less and less of it makes any kind of sense. And the thing that really sticks out like a sore thumb to me, in terms of the plot not making sense in this play, is when Tamara gives birth. So Tamara is early in the play gets married to Saturninus, who's a man who takes over as Emperor of Rome. So she is basically elevated to the Empress of Rome. And so she's married to the Emperor of Rome, but she carries on this affair with Aaron the Moor, and ends up apparently getting pregnant by Aaron and giving birth to a baby who looks like Aaron, who has dark skin like Aaron. Now, that plot point just doesn't make much sense to me for a couple reasons. First off, do 9 months really pass in the course of this play? If you read the play, I really wonder whether you actually think that 9 months could possibly have passed during the events of this play. Now, someone may counter that Tamara may already have been pregnant at the beginning of the play, because Aaron and her are implied to have been lovers before the start of the play, before they arrived in Rome. And so she may have already been heavily pregnant at the beginning of the play by Aaron. But that still doesn't really solve the issue. In fact, it just raises another issue, which is when Saturninus and her get married, why did he not question the fact that she was heavily pregnant, right? I mean, presumably they consummated their marriage, and so presumably he should have been able to, notice that she, was heavily pregnant. And so there's that aspect of it. It's just like, when did she have the time to get pregnant, go through the whole pregnancy, and then give birth? And then the other side of it is the fact that Saturninus, her husband, at no point after Tamara gives birth does he ever seem to show any awareness that he recently supposedly became a father. Like, he never asks about the baby, he never wonders what happened to the baby when it's whisked away. He seems totally unaware of the fact that his wife has just given birth, right? And I can't help but just think, it looks like Shakespeare just sort of didn't think of this, that it was just an aspect of the plot that he just didn't think enough about, and so he kind of just forgot. Which in early Shakespeare plays does happen. Shakespeare is not a perfect plotter, I think. I think he is a much better at character and beautiful and complex language than he is at creating really solidly constructed plots all the time. Sometimes he does, but a lot of times I think his plots cannot work as well as one might hope, which is not the end of the world. Again, if the characters and the writing are beautiful enough, one can sort of suspend disbelief, right, with certain plot points that strain credulity. But to my mind, in this play, the characters are just not engaging enough to overcome the weaknesses of the plot, especially when it's as egregious as this, right? And then the other big thing that sticks out to me like a sore thumb in terms of a plot hole is that later in the play, Titus's son Lucius goes and gathers up the Goths who Titus and Lucius, Titus's son, have just spent a long amount of time fighting and conquering, and presumably killing a lot of them. Lucius somehow goes and convinces an army of Goths to follow him to march on Rome against their former queen, who is now the Empress of Rome. And I just, again, I wonder how the Goths could have been so easily convinced to just turn on their own queen, right? Especially when the man asking them to do so is a man who very prominently fought against them very recently, right? And then just Titus Andronicus as a character, I feel like, has a lot of holes in him, right? Like, at the beginning, he's all sad over the slaughter of 21 out of 25 of his sons, and he's supposedly all sad about it, and he commits one of his sons to his family tomb. But then later in that same scene, he kills one of his own sons, right? And then he disowns his other remaining sons and his brother for marrying his daughter off to a man he doesn't approve of, only to then forgive them very abruptly after having killed one of them and told all the other ones that he disowned them, right? And then that doesn't even mention his killing of his own daughter at the end of the play, which always just baffles the heck out of me, that we're supposed to sit here and buy that this guy, after spending the whole play lamenting what has happened to his daughter. His daughter, Lavinia, at one point gets brutally raped, gets her hands chopped off, and her tongue cut out. And he spends the second half of this play wanting revenge for that and other things, and lamenting that his daughter has had this horrible thing done to her. But then at the end of the play, he just kills her. He just kills his own daughter, seemingly with very little motivation. So Titus doesn't make any sense to me as a character. And then, in addition, and I already talked a little bit about how the characters in Titus Andronicus to me seem weak. And I think a big part of that, a part of why the characters in Titus Andronicus seem so weak compared to many of his other plays, even his other plays that aren't particularly great, like something like The Two Gentlemen of Verona, is how stupid they all are. The characters in this play are morons, okay? Okay, so let's talk about how stupid the characters in this play are, alright? So Saturninus, in one critical scene, again, if you've read the play, you know what I'm talking about. In one critical scene, he's led to believe that Titus's sons killed Saturninus's brother Bassianus and buried him in a pit just because someone brings him a note saying, oh, well, it's Aaron the Moor who brings him the note, saying that they did it for a bag of gold, and then Aaron produces the bag of gold. And I just looked at that scene and I said, okay, really? You're just going to believe, based on this one note that Aaron just sort of hands you and tells you he found, that this is the truth, right? And then there is the scene, the insane scene, where Titus is told by Aaron the Moor that his sons, who were about to be executed for having supposedly killed Saturninus' brother, he's told by Aaron the Moor that if he chops off his own hand, or if his brother Marcus, or if his other son Lucius, if one of them chops off one of their hands, then Saturninus will spare Titus's two sons, right? His two sons who supposedly have killed Saturninus' brother, right? And Titus just, again, believes him. Everyone just believes Aaron in this play. Everyone just believes everything he says at face value, right? So Titus chops off his own hand, sends it along with Aaron, and then Aaron returns with his hand and the heads of his two sons and says, whoops, sorry, actually, your two sons did get killed. And just the credulity that Titus would have to show or credulousness is the word I'm looking for, sorry, the credulousness that Titus would have to show in that scene, just again, is baffling. And then there is the scene where Tamara pretends to be the embodiment of revenge, and has her sons also pretend to be the embodiment of rapine and I believe murder. And they come to Titus thinking that he will just believe that they are who they say they are, because Titus is feigning madness, a little bit like Hamlet would feign madness many years later in a much better play. And just the baffling nature of this plan, like, oh yeah, we're going to pretend to be revenge and rapine and murder and just expect that Titus will believe us. And then Titus just pretends to believe them, and they believe that he really does believe them. And then at the end of that scene, Titus asks Revenge, quote-unquote Revenge / Tamara, to leave her two sons with him while she goes and takes care of something. And the stupidity of Tamara leaving her two sons with the man whose daughter they brutally raped and mutilated, right? Like, she doesn't know that Titus knows that they did that, but still, the idea behind it just is hard to believe. So, really, I was left at the end of this play thinking, yeah, it's no wonder Aaron has such an easy time playing all these people off against each other, because they're all so dumb, right? Now, on that note, I will say that Aaron himself is probably the highlight of this play for me. And he does have pretty much all the best speeches, best lines. There's one speech of his in particular that is really striking. Aaron is a horrible person, but he is kind of delightfully horrible. Like, he's a villain, and he's one of those villains who I could just see a really good actor making very charismatic, right? Because he just has a lot of great lines, and also is like the only character in the play who isn't a total idiot. And so I want to read one speech of his, which is really good, and I'm reading it from Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom, because he happens to quote that speech, and because I read Titus Andronicus as an ebook, so I can't access the ebook because I'm recording on my phone right now. But so I'm going to read it from Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. So this is the speech, and this is Aaron the Moor speaking. I, that I had not done 1,000 more evil deeds, basically. I, that I had not done 1,000 more. Even now I curse the day, and yet I think few come within the compass of my curse, wherein I did not some notorious ill, as kill a man, or else devise his death, ravish a maid, or plot the way to do it, accuse some innocent, and forswear myself, set deadly enmity between two friends, make poor men's cattle break their necks, set fire on barns and haystacks in the night, and bid the owners quench them with their tears. Oft have I digged up dead men from their graves, and set them upright at their dear friend's door, even when their sorrows almost was forgot, and on their skins as on the bark of trees, have with my knife carved in Roman letters, let not your sorrow die, though I am dead. But I have done 1,000 dreadful things as willingly as one would kill a fly, and nothing grieved me heartily indeed, but that I cannot do 10,000 more. So again, he is kind of a horrible person who it's hard not to kind of like for speeches like that. And for me, he is the highlight. I really like him. And he's this intense Machiavel, right? He's a foreshadowing of characters like Iago and Edmund, right? These schemers, these villains in Shakespeare, which he would become very, very good at. And it was already, I think, pretty good at. I mean, not long after Titus Andronicus, he wrote Richard III, who was also a really great villain. And so Aaron is this foreshadowing of these sort of nihilistically evil people. But what's interesting is that he actually does kind of show a little bit of a soft side, right? The baby who he sires with Tamara, who Tamara gives birth to, the baby, Tamara, actually wants killed, right? She wants the baby killed. She sends the baby to him to kill, right? And he won't do it. You know, he actually cares for his son, remarkably enough, and wants the baby to live. And actually even hatches a plot to try to get the baby somewhere where it can be taken care of and raised perhaps in relative peace, right? And so he's a bit more interesting than an Iago, right? Iago just is evil all the way through, and it's never even really explained why he's evil, right? But Aaron has at least a little bit of a soft side, even though he keeps saying that he just does evil and wants to keep doing evil. He does have a soft side for the baby who carries his genes, right? And that's probably the thing that makes him actually care is the baby carrying his genes, right? And that's a little bit like Edmund in King Lear. Edmund at the end of King Lear, after having been kind of the main villain for the whole play, he kind of repents, right, and feels bad, and isn't able to do anything to reverse the awful events he set in motion, but he still repents. And Aaron the Moor doesn't ever repent, but he does show that soft side that Edmund perhaps showed in King Lear. So Aaron the Moor is a highlight for me. And then, so I reread the chapter in Shakespeare in The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom after reading this play, and I also read Marjorie Garber's chapter on it in Shakespeare After All. Now, I like the way that Harold Bloom opens his chapter. I agree much more with Harold Bloom on this play. He really does not like Titus Andronicus, but I also think that Harold Bloom takes Titus Andronicus a little bit too seriously. I think he needs to just put his shoulders down, ease up a little bit. It's like, it's okay. It's early in Shakespeare's career. He can write a bad play early in his career. Like, people do that. But it's a little bit like reading the Harold Bloom's chapter on the Merry Wives of Windsor, which I actually think is a delightful play, but Harold Bloom hates it because of the way Falstaff is portrayed in it. Anyway, I'm getting off track. I want to just read the opening of Harold Bloom's chapter on Titus Andronicus, because I think I think it chimes with how I might feel if I ever saw Titus Andronicus myself, which I don't think I would ever spend the money to see this play on the stage. I might consider eventually watching the Julie Taymor film Titus. I am once again getting off track. Let me read you the opening from Shakespeare, The Invention of the Humans chapter on Titus. All right? So this is what Harold Bloom has to say. Both performances of Titus Andronicus that I have attended, one in New York, one in London, had similar effects upon their audiences, who never quite knew when to be horrified and when to laugh, rather uneasily. The young Shakespeare, emerging from the composition of Richard III, perhaps rebelled against Christopher Marlowe's, still overwhelming influence by attempting a parody of Marlowe, and a kind of shock therapy for himself and his public. Something about Titus Andronicus is archaic, in an unpleasant way. Everything and everyone on stage is very remote from us, the rigid Titus most of all, except for the engaging Aaron the Moor, who is an improvement upon Richard III in the impossible contest to surpass Barabbas, Jew of Malta, who is the most highly self-aware and self-amused of villains. I can kind of see what Harold Bloom means about people not quite knowing when to laugh and when to be horrified in this play. It does read a little bit like a bad horror movie, right? Some bad horror movies, you're not quite sure how to feel, right? Should you be horrified at the gore that's going on, or is this just funny, right? And it's funny because both Harold Bloom and Marjorie Garber actually make that comparison to horror films. And yet they both seem to draw extremely different conclusions. So moving on to Marjorie Garber actually really likes this play, which I'm a little surprised by, I have to say. There's a brief passage early in her chapter. She's referring to critics who have and have not liked Titus Andronicus. And she says, quote, "Even those critics who celebrate the play, and there have been many, especially in recent years, often applaud its exceptionalism in the canon. But to look closely at this play is to see not only Shakespeare in the raw, or Shakespeare in the rough, but Shakespeare very much in command of both his theater and his plot." And I wanted to chuckle when I first read that, because I was just like, really? Really? That's your take on Titus Andronicus? That Shakespeare is in full command of his plot and his character? I'm not sure I buy it. Now, the thing that I appreciate about Marjorie Garber's commentary on this play, as I tend to appreciate in this book as a whole, Shakespeare after all, is her commentary on the language. I think Shakespeare, for me, his strengths are character and beautiful language. In this play, I think outside of Aaron, the characters are mostly cardboard cutouts, are not very interesting. But there is still a lot of language in this play that is dripping with really interesting imagery and interplay with what happens in the play. One example of this, and then I'll finish this video, one example of this that Marjorie Garber comments on is the scene where Titus has chopped off his hand. And he says to Aaron, who's just told him that he needs to chop off a hand to save his two sons, he says, "Come hither, Aaron, I'll deceive them both. Lend me thy hand, and I will give thee mine." And Marjorie Garber comments on the fact that when we think of lending a hand, we think of helping someone, right? It's a figure of speech, right? But then in the context of this play, that figure of speech gets literalized. Titus literally gives Aaron his hand. He chops off his hand and gives it to him. And there are kind of literalizations of what we initially take as figurative language throughout this play, which I think is quite clever, right? I think Shakespeare was such a talented writer that he couldn't help but have beautiful language in a play, even if the characters are flat and even if the plot makes no sense. So, I'm gonna leave it there. That's my commentary on Titus Andronicus. I don't know how this video will seem when I go and I rewatch it and edit it a little bit. Hopefully it will make some sense. I'm a little bit out of practice with this whole booktube thing. But it was nice popping on again to make a video after all this time. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on Titus Andronicus. And I am not sure if I'll be reading any more Shakespeare. I may, but I certainly intend to watch and enjoy all of the videos being posted by the hosts this year. So I will just leave it at that, and I don't know if I'll see you all soon. I usually used to always end my videos by saying I would see you all soon, but I don't know when I'll see you all next, because I'm not necessarily returning to making videos regularly. But anyway, I wish you all well, and have a good day. Bye.